Kansas, 1883. The wheat was shoulder high and the wind was rising fast when Zachary Boone heard the cry. It was faint, almost swallowed by the rustling stalks and the distant rumble of thunder. But it was there. A child's cry, sharp, scared, and far too alone for comfort. Zachary dropped the fence rail he had been mending, grabbed his hat off the post, and vaulted over the rail into the golden field. He moved fast, long strides beating through the grain, scanning the sea of gold for movement. The clouds above were darkening, bruised with the promise of a storm, and the air had shifted heavy, restless. The child cried out again, closer this time. "Hey, I hear you," Zachary called, voice low but firm. "Keep calling out. I'm coming." A small voice answered with a sob. Then he saw her, a little girl no older than 4, crouched amid the wheat with her hands over her eyes. Blonde curls tangled with dust and wheat chaff, her dress torn at the hem. She looked up at him with wide, tear-streaked cheeks. "I cannot find Mama," she whispered. Zachary knelt, gentle with his movements. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Ada," she said, clutching a ragged cloth doll. "Well, Ada, I'm going to get you to your mama. You trust me?" She nodded, lip trembling. He scooped her up, tucking her close to shield her from the wind that was starting to whip through the grain. He turned back toward the dirt lane that split the fields, boots thudding steady as the sky above turned an angry steel gray. By the time he reached the split rail fence, a woman was running down the road, skirts hitched high, hair undone and panic all over her face. "Ada!" she screamed. The girl in his arms stirred. "Mama!" Zachary stepped over the fence just as the woman reached them. She nearly collapsed when Ada threw her arms around her neck, sobbing. "I thought she was right behind me. I turned around and she was gone," the woman cried, pressing her face to her daughter's hair. Zachary steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "She was deep in the wheat. Must have wandered off and got turned around." The woman looked up at him then, really looked. Her eyes were the color of moss after rain, and filled with tears. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for finding her." He dipped his head. "Was not about to leave her out there." "I am Josie Vance," she said, still catching her breath. "We just arrived here 2 weeks ago. I was buying eggs. I turned for one moment and she slipped off after a butterfly or something." She choked on the words. Zachary let his hand fall away, unsure what to do with how hard she was shaking. "You are safe now, both of you." A crack of thunder split the sky close by. Josie flinched. Ada whimpered. Zachary looked at the storm clouds rolling in, fast and dark. "You live close. We are renting a small place just east. Half a mile, but the wind's coming up. I have a wagon under that ash grove yonder. Come on. I will get you home before the rain hits." He led them to the wagon, helped them up, and handed over a wool blanket from the bench seat. Josie wrapped it around Ada and sat close, her hands still trembling. He guided the reins, eyes scanning the sky. "You came here alone?" "My husband died last winter," she said quietly. "Ada and I were living with my sister's family in Missouri after that. But it got crowded. A neighbor back there owned this parcel and offered me a chance to tend it, said I could rent the house and keep a portion of the wheat. I needed a place to start fresh." Zachary nodded. "That is brave." "No," she said softly. "It is just what had to be done." The rain started just as the house came into view, a small, plain thing with a crooked porch and a rusted pump out front. Zachary helped Josie down, then passed Ada gently to her arms. They both ran for the porch while he tied the horses beneath the lean-to. When he stepped up onto the porch, Josie was watching him, Ada asleep against her shoulder. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "No need," he said, but she shook her head. "You found my daughter, alone in a field, With a storm coming. That is everything. He looked at her then. Really looked. She was worn thin, face pale from fear and exhaustion, hair damp from the rain and all loose around her shoulders. But there was strength in her eyes, a kind of quiet steadiness that made something shift deep in him. Let me help you, Josie. You should not be out here alone with a child and no one nearby. She hesitated. I will not overstep, he added quickly. But I have land 3 miles west. I know this area. I can fix the pump, check the fences. Josie looked down at Ada, then back up at him. I would be grateful, Zachary. He gave a small nod. Then I will be by tomorrow. The storm came hard that night, wind howling through the trees, rain slamming against the roof. But Josie and Ada were safe. And when Zachary rode home, soaked through but steady, something warm settled in his chest. He had not been looking for anything, but he had found something just the same in a wheat field, under a storm, in the eyes of a woman who had thanked him with more than words. The next morning broke damp and low-lit, with mist curling along the ground and soaking into the hem of Zachary's trousers as he approached the Vance place on foot. He'd left his horse tied at the road, not wanting to stir up the mud around her house with wagon ruts. The storm had passed, but the earth hadn't yet dried, and the air still carried the scent of wet wood and turned soil. He found Josie already outside, sleeves rolled and hair pinned up, working a hoe into the narrow strip of dirt beside the porch. She stopped when she saw him, brushing her hands against her skirt. You came. I did, Zachary said. Didn't want to wait. She gave a short nod, then pushed a damp curl behind her ear. I was trying to turn the ground here for onions. I read they'll take root before frost if planted early enough. You've got the right idea. This patch'll hold water well. He stepped closer, scanning the yard. Your fences lean in east, probably from wind last month. I'll fix that first if you don't mind. Her mouth lifted a little, not quite a smile, but close enough to stir something warm in him. I don't mind at all. From inside, a screen door creaked and Ada's small voice called out. Josie turned, stepping back into the house. Zachary took his time walking the edge of the yard, testing boards with his boot, noting where the posts had sunk. By midday, the sun had pressed through the mist, and Josie brought out a tin plate with slices of cornbread and a crock of apple butter. She set it down on the porch steps beside him without a word, then sat on the top step, arms wrapped around her knees. Did you always work land? She asked as he wiped his hands and picked up a slice. Not always, he said. My father was a cooper, used to make barrels in Missouri, near the river. I picked up farming after the war. Needed something to keep my hands busy. She looked over at him, eyes narrowing slightly. You served. He nodded once. Rode with the 2nd Kansas. Infantry first, then scouts. She didn't say anything for a while. The wind moved across the fields behind them, stirring the tall grasses that had grown wild along the fence line. Ada's voice drifted faintly from inside, humming low under her breath. I lost my brother there, Josie said finally, her voice even. Cold Harbor. He was 23. Zachary looked down at the cornbread in his hands. Too many did. She nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. That's why I left home. Everything there still had his shadow on it. Couldn't sit in that house and pretend it was just mine. He didn't press her. There was a weight in her words that didn't need answering. Instead, he reached for the hoe she'd left beside the porch and rose to his feet. I'll till that patch for you proper, he said, so the onions have a fair chance. Josie stood, brushing off her skirt. You don't have to do all that. I know, he said, but I want to. She watched him for a second longer, then gave a faint nod and stepped aside. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet work. Zachary turned the earth beside the house while Josie patched the edge of the lean-to with canvas she'd salvaged from her trunk. They didn't speak much, but the silence sat easy between them. Not empty, just full of the kind of understanding that didn't need words. As the sun lowered and shadows stretched long across the yard, Josie leaned against the porch rail, arms folded, watching him coil rope after securing the last fence post. "You fix things like it's second nature," she said. "I've had enough things fall apart to know how to keep some standing," he replied. She tilted her head, studying him. "You always this quiet?" He glanced at her, one brow raised. "You always this curious?" That earned a real smile from her. It was small, but it lingered. "I suppose I am," she said. He nodded toward the house. "You and Ada got what you need for the night?" "Almost," she said. "I plan to walk to the store tomorrow. We're short on flour. I'll bring you some from town. Saves you the trip." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." He stepped down from the porch, tugging his gloves from his belt. The sky above had turned soft with dusk, all lavender and gold. "I'll be back in the morning," he said. Josie stayed where she was, hands wrapped around the rail. "Zachary," he turned. "You don't have to keep doing all this." "I know." She didn't respond, just watched him go. He felt her eyes on him all the way down the path, until the tall grass swallowed the sound of his steps. That night he couldn't sleep, not from restlessness, but from the quiet ache of something beginning. Something that hadn't tried to announce itself, but had settled in like the slow opening of a door left closed too long. By the week's end, Zachary had stopped knocking when he came. Josie left the front door latched open just enough to show she was home, and he took that as welcome. Ada would be on the rug with her slate or following a line of ants across the porch rail, and Josie would be somewhere between kitchen and garden, sleeves rolled, face flushed from sun or work. That Saturday he brought over a sack of flour along with a bundle of seed potatoes wrapped in burlap. "You'll get a good yield next spring if they go in before the frost," he said, setting the sack beside the porch. Josie stepped out with a damp apron in hand. "I was going to ask about potatoes, but you beat me to it." "You were bound to eventually," he said. She folded the apron over the rail. "You always anticipate what people need?" "Only when I'm paying attention." She looked up at him then, eyes steady, the corner of her mouth turning just a touch. "Well, you're good at it." They planted the potatoes side by side in the long patch behind the house, where the ground had stayed soft. Zachary showed her how deep to cut the furrows with the spade, how to angle the pieces so the eyes pointed east. "Why east?" she asked. "First light wakes them sooner." Josie wiped her brow with the back of her wrist. "That seems more like poetry than farming." "Sometimes it's both," he said. Afterward, they sat on the porch steps and Josie poured water from a crock. Ada had fallen asleep curled in a corner of the porch, one hand still clutched around a pine cone she'd found. "I've been thinking of keeping chickens," Josie said, voice low so she wouldn't wake the child. "I could trade eggs in town. Might stretch my coin through winter." "There's a man off the river road sells pullets near Lang Age," Zachary replied. "I could bring you 2 or 3 if you've got a place to put them. I've got wood scraps from the lean-to. I could build something small." He looked at her then. Dirt streaked her forearms, and there was a blister just opening along her palm, but she didn't seem to notice. "You don't mind the work," he said. "I don't," she answered. "It's the first time I've had something that was mine to work for." The wind had picked up again, rustling through the drying grass. Zachary leaned forward, bracing his arms on his knees. "You ever feel like you're building something just to prove you still can?" Josie didn't look at him right away. When she did, her gaze held something deeper than curiosity. "Every morning," she said. The moment stretched long between them, quiet but not empty. Ada stirred slightly in her sleep. Zachary stood, brushing off his trousers. "I'll come by Monday with the chickens." Josie rose too, slower, stretching the stiffness from her spine. "I'll have the coop ready." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of cloth. "For your hand," he said, nodding at the blister. She accepted it without a word, fingers brushing his for just a second longer than they needed to. He walked back through the fields as the sun dipped west, casting long gold shadows behind him. And behind him, Josie watched until he disappeared down the path. By Monday, the coop stood behind the lean-to, squat and square, its roof patched with tin, its door fashioned from a shutter Josie had pried off the back bedroom. She'd lined the interior with straw and set a shallow dish inside. Filled with water from the pump, she'd coaxed into working again with a length of wire and a prayer. When Zachary arrived, leading a rope-haltered mule cart, the 3 hens nestled in a wooden crate. They clucked softly as he lifted the lid and handed Josie the first one, her hands steady beneath the bird's weight. "These'll take a few days to settle," he said. "But they're near ready. You keep them fed and quiet. They'll start laying before the first frost." Josie opened the coop door and set the hen inside. "What do they eat?" "Table scraps'll go far. Grain if you've got it. They're not particular." She crouched beside the crate as he passed her the second hen. "Ada's going to name them all. She's already decided one's called Martha." Zachary gave a low chuckle. "She picked that on account of anyone?" "My aunt," Josie said. "She used to chase chickens with a broom." The last hen fluttered as she took it, and Josie ducked her head to keep from laughing aloud. When she glanced up, Zachary was watching her not with pity or distance, but something else. Still, quiet, present. "I've been thinking," she said, brushing a feather from her skirt, "about winter." He waited, hands resting on his belt. "I've never lived through one out here," she continued. "We had coal back in Missouri, but this place only has the stove, and the shed's near empty." "I've got cut wood stored up," he said. "More than I'll use. I can haul some over." "I'd pay you." "No need." "I'd rather," she said, her voice sure. "I don't want charity." Zachary dipped his head once. "Fair." She stood, dusting her hands. "I can trade eggs once the hens settle. And I've got a pair of boots Ada's outgrown. Still good, if someone needs them." He nodded again, slower this time. "There's a family down Clear Creek way. 5 boys. I'll take them by." They walked back to the porch together. Ada was on a stool near the doorway, stringing dry beans onto a thread with careful fingers. She looked up as they approached, eyes bright. "Zachary, Martha laid down already." "Smart bird," he said. "Knows when to rest." Josie stepped inside to fetch the last of the beans, and Zachary lowered himself to the porch rail beside Ada. "You like it here?" he asked. She nodded, swinging her bare feet. "Mama says we're staying." He looked toward the fields, where the wheat stubble had turned gold and brittle under the late sun. "That's so?" She said roots only grow if you stop running. Zachary didn't answer right away. He watched the porch shadow stretch across the yard, the edge of it just brushing the spot where he'd first seen Josie standing with her arms around her daughter, wind in her hair, storm behind her. When she came back out, she carried a covered tin. "Biscuit ends. You said scraps were good." "They are. I'll leave the rest of the eggs to cool in the cellar. You'll take some when you go. If you've got more than you need." "I will." They stood there a moment longer, the quiet settling in like dusk. Ada hummed under her breath again, something tuneless and soft. "You ever think about leaving?" Josie asked, not looking at him. "I used to," he said. "Thought I'd go west. Oregon maybe. But things held me back." "Like what?" He looked at her then. "Nothing I could name. just something that felt like waiting. Her eyes didn't move from his. And now I think maybe it was waiting for this. She didn't step closer, but she didn't move away either. Her face was steady, the wind tugging at the ends of her hair where they'd slipped loose from the braid. "You're not just helping because it's decent," she said. "Are you?" "No," he said. "I'm not." Josie looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Then don't go just yet." "I won't." And he didn't. He stayed until the sun dropped behind the edge of the fields, until Ada fell asleep curled in a quilt on the porch, until the chickens had settled quiet in the coop and the air turned cool enough to need a shawl. He stayed until Josie looked at him not in thanks, not in obligation but in answer. By mid-October, the wind came sharper through the west fields, and the wheat stubble rattled with it. The coop had held through the first frost, and the hens were laying regular enough that Josie wrapped eggs in soft cloth and sent them with Zachary when he passed through town. He never stayed long in the store, just enough to trade for salt or kerosene. But folks had begun to nod at him differently, like they could see what had settled between him and the widow out east. One morning, Josie stood in the root cellar sorting the last of the apples, her shawl drawn tight. She heard Ada's voice through the floorboards above, then the creak of boots. Zachary's voice followed, low and warm, and then the door opened at the top of the steps. "Thought you might be down there," he said, lowering a sack. "You're early," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "Not that I mind. Had a feeling the cold came heavy last night." He nodded toward the sack. "Brought more kindling." She straightened from the crate of apples. "You always bring things before I ask, because I've already thought about what you might need." She held his gaze a moment longer, then climbed the steps, her skirts brushing the stone walls as she passed him. Later, as she stirred cornmeal over the stove, Ada asleep in the corner with her doll, Zachary leaned near the hearth, studying the quiet way Josie moved through the kitchen. "You ever think you'd live like this?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "Which part?" "All of it. A house that creaks in the wind. A little girl who believes chickens talk if you're quiet enough. A man hanging around like he belongs." Josie gave the cornmeal one last stir, then set the pot aside and turned to face him fully. "No," she said, "I never pictured it. But I'm not letting go of it either." He crossed to her, boots soft on the worn floorboards. The lantern flickered between them, catching the edge of his jaw, the line of her collarbone. He reached out, slow, and touched her waist lightly, as if waiting for refusal. When none came, his hand settled there. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low. She tilted her face toward his. "You always are. This house could use another pair of hands come winter." Her breath caught, just enough to make her chest lift beneath his touch. "And Ada's got room in her world for more than chickens and thread dolls." Josie pressed her palm to the front of his coat. "And what about you?" "I've had a quiet life, but not a full one. Not until now." She didn't answer. She leaned into him instead, her head resting against his shoulder. His arms wrapped around her, sure and solid, and for the first time in years, she let herself lean all the way in. They married before Thanksgiving. No church bells or dresses of lace, just a paper signed at the courthouse and a supper shared with the neighbor couple who'd first helped Josie find the place. Ada wore a ribbon in her hair and clutched a sweet biscuit in each hand. Afterward, Zachary carried her to bed while Josie tucked the quilts tighter around the windows. They spent the winter in rhythm. Chores and laughter, shared blankets, the hush of snow falling outside while they sat near the stove with Ada tucked between them. Zachary carved small things for her wooden animals. A whistle shaped like a sparrow, and Josie mended his shirts with careful stitches. They spoke less than most, but every glance said enough. Come spring, new hens hatched, potatoes sprouted, Josie planted a row of pole beans and, beside it, a patch of marigolds. The fence held. The house stood. And in the yard where once there had been only stubble and wind, there was now a swing tied to the ash tree, a wash line strung with linen, and a pair of chairs worn smooth from evenings spent side by side. They did not speak of forever, but they lived it. And when Ada grew tall enough to chase the chickens instead of name them, Josie would watch her from the porch, Zachary's hand resting over hers, and know they had built something that would hold. Not because it had come easy, but because it had come true.